Hey everyone. Today we're really going to start diving into the lecture material and talking about world religions. And so for our lecture today, we're going to be talking about what is religion. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about how to try to come up with a definition for religion in this course. And you're going to really see why coming up with a definition of religion is sometimes very complicated, problematic, because trying to categorize something as large and as all-encompassing as religion can be is very problematic, and that a simplistic definition of religion just won't cut it. But hopefully at the very end, we'll have a very good, strong definition of what religion is, an idea of what religion is for this course as we go forward, progressing through the various world religions. But first, we need to talk about here the problem with religion and why that is one of the most hotly debated, strongly disagreed subject within the field of religion. Really, since the academic field of religion kind of opened up for academia who aren't considered to go into the ministry or who don't have some attachment to a religious institution, that kind of all started in the 1960s. And we started to try to find a definition for religion that did not placate to one side of a religious faith or to a religious institution, but to be kind of neutral, because starting in the 1960s, at least on a global scale, the world was becoming more and more diverse, and particularly here in the United States, with the passage of the HART Act, which opened up immigration more and more, the United States itself was becoming more and more diverse. So we needed a diverse definition of religion. So it's one of the most complicated things for scholars really to define. Now, you might look at me with a kind of puzzled face thinking, aren't you kind of, Professor, making much ado about nothing here? I mean, come on. We all know what religion is. If I were to grab you and transport you and take you inside of a Catholic church, and we're there and we see the father at the front, the priest up there at the front performing mass, immediately you will know and recognize. If I turn and ask you, hey, is this a religion? Immediately, instantly, you will turn to me and say, yes, that is a religion. And I could do the same thing. I could pick you up, transport you, take you to another site, go to a Buddhist temple, go to a Buddhist sanctuary where there's Buddhist priests praying, people sitting there performing mantras, humming various sounds in front of a statue of the Buddha or of a Bodhisattva, and you would say immediately, very quickly, yes, that is a religion. So again, are we just trying to make something up? It seems very, very simplistic here. So really quickly, what I want you to do is, just as an example here, I want you to take a piece of paper, take a pen, or if you're on your computer, just open up a clean Word document on your computer, and I want you to at least write down 10 simplistic words that you think are religion. 10 things that you think are religion, what classifies as a religion. So hopefully you've done that and jot yourself down 10 words here real quick. Think of 10 words in your head or type them out on your computer, but 10 words that you know for certain that these are religions. And we're going to try to come up with a definition that is all cumbersome, that circumvents, but encapsulates all of these religions. And we might all kind of disagree. We might give the basic kind of simple definitions. Things like, well, the obvious one is it has to have a belief in God. Some type of God or goddess or gods. that would seem to be a very simplistic belief. I mean, that would set religion apart from science, that would set religion apart from philosophy, that would set religion apart from other fields of study, anthropology, as an example. Or you could make it another kind of easy definition that it has to have a place of meeting, some kind of assembly together, a church, a temple, a mosque. That seems again to be an all-encompassing definition there. It encapsulates a lot of religions, or that it has to have some kind of sacred scripture or a Bible, something that people read and meditate upon, gather teachings from, and instill them and impart them in their lives. However, the problem is that not all of these things have these parallels. So take, for example, if we just say it has to have a simple belief system, well, you could also argue that a fan club of a famous singer like Justin Bieber, whose fans are known as Beliebers, because it's a play on words of believer and Justin Bieber fans. Justin Bieber fans believe that this artist is the greatest of all singers, that many of their fans have probably regular attendances, places where they would meet online, special chat rooms. And the song albums, the lyric albums, become kind of like sacred scripture to them, that each one of them knows, memorizes, repeats, meditates upon, because it has some type of effect upon their life. So what's the difference between a Protestant and Justin Bieber fans? Oh, well, belief in God. Okay, that's fair. What about comparing then that with Freemasons? Freemasons, if you're not familiar with who Freemasons are the Masons are a fraternity club. Primarily only reserved for men, but however, there are female versions of Freemasonry. But it's a fraternity club set up in the late 16th century, 17th century in Europe, and was very important in the Enlightenment period. Many of the great Enlightenment thinkers were a part of this group. But Freemasons believe in God. That's part of the requirement to be a Freemason, is you have to believe in God, an absolute God, in fact. So it makes it a little bit different than just gods. You have to believe in Holy Scripture, primarily the Bible, but however, some Freemasons are Muslims, because you have to believe in a scripture, revealed scripture. You also have to meet regularly. Freemasons meet typically once a month, on a Thursday, sometimes a Tuesday, once a month, at a temple, at their local lodge. That sounds like a church. So again, what's the difference? Okay, well, we can say, what about Scientology? They have a belief in a God system. They have a church. There's churches of the Scientology everywhere. They have scriptures, things that they consider to be important. So again, where do we draw the line? Well, it's like, that's different. Scientology is different because that's a cult. Well, what about Buddhism? Buddhists don't believe in God. They're a non-theistic religion. Buddhists don't have Bibles. There's not one set of scriptures that Buddhists look to. There's some Buddhists that don't even look to scriptures at all. They look to nature. They look to poetry. So again, you can kind of see this is just a cheap example, but this example here shows you just how kind of problematic it is to come up with a definition of religion. Like, we think we know what it is, but when we try to put it on paper, it's actually quite difficult. These other examples, like Pastafarianism, to some people, it's a religion. We look at it and it seems like a joke. A satire religion, originally designed as a satire religion, meaning to make fun of religion. But some of its fans end up becoming followers. So now Pastafarianism is a recognized religion to some extent. It has ordination of ministers, trainings. It has scriptures. It has particular religious garb that people wear. There's a famous case that happened in 2006, and I think later in 2010 in Canada, where people who identified themselves as Pastafarianisms got part of their garb. Let me back up just a little bit. Part of their garb, their religious garb that they wear, is a pasta strainer on their head. So just imagine that, somebody standing there with a pasta strainer that you put pasta in, hot boiling water, pot of water and pasta, drain out all the water and all of the gluten out of the water and out of the pan. They wear those things. The colanders is the official term for it, but they wear a pasta strainer on top of their head because they argue it's part of their religious garb. And one Pastafarian tried to wear it while taking a driver's license because in the state of Arizona at the time, you could wear your religious garb on official government documentation. So, of course, somebody walks into the DMV wanting to take their picture with a pasta strainer on their head. You're going to think, my God, they're crazy. I'm not going to let this wacko do it. But, however, the man successfully proved in court that he is a believer of this religion. And under the First Amendment, the protections of the First Amendment, freedom of religious expression, he was proved right by the court. And his religious garb was upheld. And so it made a wave of people throughout the early 2000s or the late 2000s and into the 2010s to have government documentation with a pasta strainer on their head. Now, was this be just having silliness? We don't know. But by the letter of the law and proof in open court, the guy was able to determine and convince a judge and jury that this was his religion and part of his religious garb under the protection of the First Amendment. So is it a religion? Well, the court said yes. But you look at it, you study the scriptures, you'll be like, oh, hell no. It doesn't sound like a religion to me. Again, that's the point. That's the point of this lecture, the point of this kind of little exercise here, that religion is a very complicated thing to discuss. We just can't simply reduce it down to its most simplistic effort. And so I wanted to show you this quick video here from John Oliver a couple of years ago, where he demonstrates this point to perfection. And so pardon, I think he will use some harsh language here, but we're all adults in the room here. I think we can handle it. But I wanted to show you this little video clip because it illustrates the point fantastically.
There's a person watching me, and you've been very frustrated with your purpose in life.
That might be me, Bob, because I'm extremely frustrated right now, as it seems my purpose in the last 7 months has been to send you money through the fucking mail. So I will ask, what's that message that you have for me?
That's so strong just then. Just then, I had a word of knowledge for someone that's really been seeking God, you have, for a particular purpose or decision in your life.
And that is when I realised the message Robert Tilton was sending me was that I should set up my own church to test the legal and financial limits of what religious entities are able to do. And so, that is what we have done. We filed paperwork last week establishing a church called Our Lady of Perpetual Exemption. And it was disturbingly easy. To make sure we did this correctly, we had this actual tax lawyer walk us through the process. Now, while the IRS does not have a definition of a church, they do have a 14-point test as a guideline for churches. But not only do you not have to meet all 14 points, we'd already met some of them by accident. For instance, you need an established place of worship, but we meet every Sunday in this studio in New York, and apparently that genuinely counts. Our lawyer also advised us our church needed to be a distinct legal entity, so we registered our church as a non-profit corporation in Texas, a state I do not live in, have never lived in, but which is somehow completely fine for us to incorporate a church in. Now, the IRS's guidelines suggest you need a creed and form of worship, but our lawyer suggested we could fulfill the worship requirement by merely leading everyone in some specific ritual, such as having congregants silently meditate on the nature of fraudulent churches. So, let us do exactly that and bow our heads in silent contemplation. And lo, another box was ticked. Amen. And finally, according to our attorney, the best case for church membership will be made by those individuals who are actually present in the live studio audience who will profess belief in the church's creed. So what do you say, live studio audience? Do you profess your belief? I said, do you profess your belief tonight, brothers and sisters? Then there is only one thing left for us to do. Let's go to church. Brothers and sisters, welcome to Our Lady of Perpetual Exemption.
So this was just a funny example here, a quite funny simile about the problem of defining a religion. That you would think that the IRS here in the United States, where we have a clear definition of what freedom of religion should be able to look like, that the IRS should have a clear understanding of what a religion is, or as John Oliver is using at this point, a church, a place of religious gathering. You can see that they had this 14-point test, but the 14-point test was so broad that in fact, a television episode, a television audience, a television show could simply classify and meet the requirements and satisfy the IRS, satisfy the United States government that this is a church. This is a legitimate religion. Again, you would think the United States that prides itself on the freedom of religion could define what religion is. And in truth, it really can't. It has to create a broad, cumbersome definition to try to encapsulate what all of religion could possibly be. And that's kind of the point here. That religion is very tough to define, extremely tough to define as a field of study, as we'll grow and see as the lecture progresses. But I just wanted to show you this example here because, again, it's a fantastic point. John Oliver does a fantastic illustration here of the ridiculousness of trying to simply give a simple definition of religion. It's quite hard. It's extremely quite hard. And you can see the difficulties of creating something so broad as well as creating something so narrow. In addition to a definition of religion, there's other things that we have to think about when we approach the field of religion, the study of religion, that there are certain biases, inherent biases that we, all of us here in this room, approach religion with. That we bring this inherently, whether we think about it instinctively or not, we bring this to the conversation when we talk about religion. So this is mainly just to be aware of it. I myself have been not always perfect at identifying these biases. I know what they are, but you'll see probably as we go through this lecture, there's moments where I slip. Because again, these inherent biases that I have as a person and as I have growing up in a particular culture. So the first bias that we have to remember and that we have to be aware of is that religion is largely a Western concept. The idea of religion, or let me rephrase that, the definition of religion, this categorization of the separate field of religion, is in fact a Western concept. And what do I mean by that is that we tend to define religion in terms of a set of beliefs having to do with the supreme God, a Messiah, some sacred literature that contributes to a system of belief systems. That religion has to have these things. As you can see from the example of above that I have. If we all try to create a simple definition of religion, belief in God, has to have a church, has to have a Bible. That betrays right there a Western ideology. But more specifically here, as religion is a Western concept, the term religion is in itself a Western word. Comes from the Latin religio. And that word religio is actually quite problematic. But even in Latin culture, it's an invented word. So we really don't know the definition of this Latin word religio. Our best guess is that we have three evidences, the earliest evidence of writing that we have. So the first one comes from actually Julius Caesar, when he was writing in his famous book, The War on the Gauls, where it talks about his campaign against the tribes of French people that live in the area of Gaul, as the Romans called France at that time, the Gauls. So the French, all the various tribes that make up the French people today, or the French people, the region of France today. In it, he uses the word religio, but in it, he talks about it as a kind of loyalty oath. He talks about how that the various tribe leaders that Julius Caesar had conquered, that they would come present themselves before him and that they would make religio, that they would make a kind of covenantal agreement, a contract, a loyalty oath, a contract saying, hey, I recognize your authority here, Caesar. And I promise that I am not going to revolt against your authority, that I have promised that I'm going to collect taxes and send those tax monies from collect the taxes from my people, send those tax money to you and to the Romans, and we're going to be loyal servants to the Roman Republic. The word religion here in the writings of Julius Caesar are used as a loyalty oath. Later on, there's another writer that's somewhat contemporary with Julius Caesar, just a few years, decades later, and Cicero. Cicero, the great, famous Roman senator and Roman orator and philosopher and great writer at the very early stages of the last days of the Roman Republic and the first few days of the Roman Empire. Cicero uses and talks about the word religion. He talks about religion, religio, as a kind of a best way of kind of not binding. That's the word that I'm thinking of. Bending. Yes, like a bending of the knee. So again, sort of like a loyalty oath here, but for Cicero's conversations, he's talking about a bending of the knee in front of the gods. So loyalty to the gods, perhaps, contractual agreement to the gods, perhaps. But then later, Pliny the Elder, when he talks about other cultures, he uses the word religio to talk about worshiping other gods as religio. So again, it seems like the Roman context is a contract, a loyalty oath, binding yourself to someone, bending the knee to someone else, giving respect, reverence. Over time, religion becomes, particularly with the Protestant faith, religion becomes synonymous with having faith in something, having belief in something. Then it transforms. Throughout the medieval period, religion was primarily used as a descriptor of this is what the priests do. The roles and the duties of the priest or the monks or the nuns, the members of the church, the hierarchy of the church, they do religion, but what the laity do isn't religion. Religion is this type of work that's only reserved for certain people. Again, the people who make up the institution. But however, with the Protestant Reformation, with the writings of Martin Luther, religion becomes more about individual beliefs, faith, beliefs in something. That idea of faith doesn't really exist in the eastern side of the world. They don't see what they do as religion. So if you walk up to a Hindu, you walk up to a Buddhist, and you ask them to describe their religion, they might look a little kind of cross-eyed at you, like, what are you talking about? Because that word, religion, actually doesn't exist in their language. It does now because of modern times, because Westerners have forced that term upon these cultures. But there is no word, there is no Hindu word for religion. There is no Chinese word for religion. It's something that had to be invented much, much later because of exposure to European cultures. So I want you to be aware of that religion is largely a Western concept. It's something that the West, and more specifically, Christian culture, has developed and come up with, and that we apply to everybody else. Hindus and Buddhists would see what they're doing as just living their life. This is part of living their life, or they might see it as part of their philosophy instead of religion. They don't separate the two like we do here in the West. So be mindful of that religion is largely a Western concept. Number two, we have to be aware of our Western biases. So this is a little bit different than religion as a Western concept, but Western biases. And what do I mean by Western biases? Is that viewing the world really from a European influence and perspective. So again, back to that little simple definition up at the top of the lecture. That betrays a simple Western biases, that all religions have to have a belief in God because the Western religions do. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they have a belief in a God. Central to what makes them a religion is they believe in God. They have to have a church. The Christians have this place of assembly called a church, ecclesia, church. Jews have synagogues or temples, depending on their definition. Muslims have mosque, a dedicated place of assembly. So thus other religions have to have that too. In order to be a religion, they have to have a Bible. Christians have the gospel. The Jews have the Torah. Muslims have the Quran, this centralized text of worship, of how they're to live their life, and of them to read and study and keep with them, to meditate on, to have in their homes. And that when they come to their assemblies, they bring these texts with them to open up and to study and read. Eastern cultures don't have that. That's not part of their DNA. But yet we force that upon them of saying, hey, this is what a religion is. It has to have these things. So therefore we need to be mindful that when we get to Hinduism there's many cultures within Hinduism that don't believe in God. Buddhists, one of the significant denominations of Buddhism, doesn't have a belief in God. Really, all of Buddhism doesn't believe in God. So how can it not be a religion? Hindus don't have a dedicated place of worship where they go to, especially in the diaspora. They don't. Instead, their places of worship are their homes, a little special place within their home. Is that a church then? Is that a place of assembly? Is that a mosque? Is that a synagogue? So you can see the problems here already. So again, we have to be aware of our Western biases. And typically as well, as the last thing I want to say, I typically see this all the time within my courses, within the field of religion as well, that here we'll see, and I know and I'll experience and encounter that many of you in this course already have a particular religious persuasion, whether it's Christian, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Islam. That's fine and dandy, but however, I'll routinely see in assignments from students that submit assignments to me where they'll express how come their religion is far superior than others. That's fine. That's your opinion. But I just want to note, we're not doing that here. We're not counting cards. We're not comparison shopping here. We're not saying who's number one, who's number two, who's number three, and who's number four, and who's dead last. No. We're going to show respect. So Western biases. We also need to be conscious of gender biases. And what do I mean by that? Particularly in the field of religion, that often when we talk about it and when we study religion, we typically only talk about gods. Rarely do we talk about goddesses. Maybe in Greek culture that we do. We talk about the famous Greek goddesses like Aphrodite, Athena, Hera. We might talk about these gods, but we don't talk about female gods in Hinduism very much. We don't talk about Lakshmi, Kali, Durga, Pavalti. We don't talk about Hindu gods that often, goddesses really that often, if not at all. We also have to remember that largely within these religions, that the religious experiences and the religious advocacies that they offer typically only show one side of the coin, the male perspective. There's often male men who are writing these religious texts, and that often the texts are aimed at male experiences of life. And when they do talk about women, some of these religious texts, they do talk about women in a quite negative term, in a negative light. That women are seen as property, that women are seen as lesser figures. So for example, within Hinduism, the goal of a woman's life in Hinduism is to be a good wife, to be a good mother, to provide children, particularly male children, to her spouse, and is to worship and adore and revere and respect her husband as if he was her God. And that her salvation, if I could use that term, her salvation is dependent upon her husband. It's not the same way for a male in Hinduism. The male experience is quite different, significantly different. Buddhism, for example, that even though every individual has the responsibility, the duty to transition from this life, the human form, and transition out of it to experience nirvana, certain Buddhist texts, certain Buddhist denominations would say that, well, it's only reserved for males. If you happen to be born a female, you need to reincarnate one more time as a male in order to escape this life. Jainism, the same kind of definition as well. Liberation is only reserved for males, not females. So again, we need to be mindful of religion has an inherent gender bias against it. So we sometimes need to think about the other side of the coin, the other side of the perspective within a religious debate, a religious context. We also need to be mindful of there is a significant and clear difference between religious and spirituality. There is a difference. We might not think there is, but there is. Religious, if I could give a definition of what religious is just simply relating to or believing in a religion. Whereas spirituality doesn't have to involve religion at all. Spirituality is just kind of an umbrella term that we use, an umbrella category that refers to a sense of connection to something greater than oneself, and often involves a search for meaning and purpose in life, and is generally subjective to esoteric experiences, whereas religion doesn't have to be. So we need to be mindful that there are clear differences, and that for some people, spirituality is different than having a religious experiences, so that we do not conflate the two. They are different. Lastly, we need to also be aware that there is a difference between religion and the secular. And what do I mean by secular? Secular, if I can give a definition here, secular refers to something that is not connected to or controlled by religion, either religious beliefs or religious institutions. And secular refers to decisions and actions that are based on non-religious principles, such as logic, reason, science, and evidence. That's secular. Secular is, here in the West, and see, this is a problem here, because again, here in the West, we divide the two. We divide religion and secularism. We separate them. Separation of church and state. We separate the two, and we keep them separate. However, in the rest of the world, that's not the case. Religion and secularism are one and the same, or they're together. They're often bound together. So we need to be aware of that here in the West, we tend to separate the two. But in the rest of the world, they're one and the same. That's why religious leaders sometimes rule countries. Like Iran, Tibet. Well, Tibet's, the free area of Tibet is still ruled by a religious leader. Or that religion plays such an important part of society and culture in certain other areas of the world. Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. So again, we need to be mindful of all of these things when we go forward and progress in our study of religion. So why is religion so tough to find? It's because of some of these biases that we have here today. But as another point that I want to make here is that there's particular similarities to two other main topics that often get linked together with religion. That religion does parallel to a lot of discussions about ghosts or specters, as well as you can see here that religion also has some very close similarities to that with pornography. So first, let's talk about ghosts. So the French philosopher Jacques Derrida famously defined religion through the illustration of a specter for him, because he's French. Or for us, it would be ghost. He famously said that religion is like a ghost. It is universally present in every society and universally understood in every society without having a clear definition. And if you think about it, he's right. Every culture on the globe, whether past or present, has a clear belief system and understanding and a clear definition of ghosts. They have ghost stories. I could go somewhere in China and not speak the language and yet draw on the ground a simple image like this here on the screen of this kind of ghostly looking figure, and they would know exactly what I meant. We don't have this universal definition of what a ghost is, but every culture has some semblance of an idea of what a ghost is. Same thing as religion, that every culture has an idea of what religion is, has developed, whether past or present, has developed a religious system, a belief system within their society that exists. That universally understood that what they're doing is religion, but yet we don't have a definition. We didn't meet together of, hey, a religion has to have this before we all separate into our own little islands and communities and nations. No. It just has developed naturally within our human existence, within our culture or society. Religion has just evolved naturally. It's what humans do. Jacques Derrida makes the same argument about ghosts. Ghosts have just naturally emerged. It wasn't somebody that came down from on high and say, oh, this is a ghost. This is what you're supposed to believe in. Nothing like that. Ideas about ghosts and about demons, ghouls and goblins, they seem to have just appeared naturally within our culture. We might have some explanations about this, as ghosts appear as an explanation for why we dream the way we dream, that we have visions of ourselves, or we try to explain things that don't make sense, that, oh, why this book all of a sudden fell? Why did the house all of a sudden creak? It's a ghost. The door shut automatically. It's a ghost. We don't know. Ghosts don't have clear origins, yet they're everywhere. They exist in every single culture throughout history, both past and present. They're as old as time itself. Same thing as religion. Religion seems to be as old as time itself, or, well, as old as human society. Let me rephrase that. You can go all the way back beyond the Neanderthals, and you can see evidence of these early Homo sapiens. That you can see evidence of them doing religion. So the best example that we have from, these people groups, our early ancestors, is intentional burials. Why did our society, why do these early ancestors, who might not have an idea of what civilization is, that live in caves, that have simple handmade tools, whose brains might not be as developed as us today as Homo sapiens, but these early forms of Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, why do they have and practice intentional burial? And when we have discovered these intentional burials, we've seen that the bodies were taken well care of. It wasn't done in haste. The grave wasn't dug up in haste. The body just thrown, laying there in a particular awkward way. No, it seems like the body was taken with good care. We see evidence of wrappings, pigments, powders that were used to either clean the body or decorate the body, found inside these graves. We also see the presence of what we call grave goods, beads, clothing material. Why were the Neanderthals leaving this behind in a buried tomb? Don't you think they need to have that for themselves? Knives, things to trade with to help survive, but yet they intentionally bury these things. So it's led many anthropologists to argue, is this the earliest forms of religion that we see? A belief in an afterlife. Why are you going to bury somebody, take the time to bury someone properly and with weapons, or bury them with their favorite necklaces and jewelries and designs and paint their bodies? Why? Unless you believe in an afterlife. If you think about it, it's the exact same thing that the Neanderthals were doing 7,000, 8,000, 13,000 years ago, that we have some of this evidence from, that the pharaohs were doing. Just the Neanderthals weren't building great pyramids, but they were doing the same thing. And so what we see in the ancient Egyptians, we say, hey, this is part of their religious beliefs. Thus, the Neanderthals, the early versions of the Homo sapiens, were doing religion. But it seemed to also, why you bury someone is because he had a belief system about a ghost, a soul. So again, they're linked together, and they're as old as time. And so religions like ghosts, how Derrida argued, is really a reality that is dependent upon individual experiences and individual interpretations. So again, ghosts exist because of individual reportings, not large-scale reportings of entire societies, of entire armies of people, but individual stories. And they keep getting, retold and keep getting believed because somebody says, well, I experienced a ghost. I saw a ghost. There's no metaphysical evidence. We never trapped a ghost like the Ghostbusters. But yet ghosts exist, and the belief in ghosts continues to exist even though we don't have physical evidence for it. It all depends on the individual belief and then the collective to believe that individual. So for example, one of the towns that I grew up in Mississippi, we had tons of ghost stories because our town was able to survive the Civil War. So it had lots of old antebellum homes that didn't get destroyed. So it has a lot of these old mansions and homes, and so there's full of ghost stories. Each of them have individual ghost stories. And so every April, you would go on what is known as the pilgrimage tour, that you would go to these various homes, and every single home had a ghost story because of how old they existed. And so one of the most famous of these homes and ghost stories is the old Waverly Mansion that is now a famous golf course in Mississippi. But the Waverly Mansion was haunted by a ghost, and you would have various workers who would always testify. I had friends that said they saw all the old Waverly ghosts. They would see sometimes an impression that was made into the bed that looked like a person. Or that they would see, they'd be working at the bar and would look up while their backs turned to the audience and the crowd, but there's a mirror at the top of the bar. When they would look up, they would see somebody, then turn around and no one's there. They think they would hear something. And so there's all these stories, but they were all individual experiences, but they were collectively individual. And so people would always believe in these ghost stories. The same thing about religion. Religion does seem to be an individual experience. My religion is true to me versus your religion is true to you, but it's not, but your religion might not be true to me. Again, based off these individual experiences. So it has some weight to it, but yet there's no metaphysical evidence that religion is real. It's based off what I would call circumstantial evidence. Individual experiences. So an example of circumstantial evidence would again be all of these ghost stories. Or a better one would be my grandfather smoked cigarettes every day of his life, a pack of cigarettes every day of his life. And he lived to be over 100. Thus, cigarettes aren't bad for you. They don't give cancer. You can smoke them. Because of my grandfather, he lived to be 100. He didn't die from cancer. He didn't die from cigarettes. He died from old age. Thus, that's circumstantial evidence. One individual person has this experience, and thus it paints every other experiences. Religion is based a lot on circumstantial evidence. It might be true for that individual, but it's not true for the collective. Same thing for ghosts. It works the same way. The same thing as well as pornography. Pornography and religion have really similar definitions. It's very hard to define what pornography is. You might have a different definition of what is indecent, because that's really what it is, a definition of indecency. And so many of you who perhaps are of the female persuasion, many of you have stories, and you can recall of you fighting your mother over the style and choice of your clothing for that day. Your mother might fight with you saying, oh, that piece of clothing, that tank top is a little bit too revealing. That skirt is a little bit too short. It's indecent. Go change. And you might stand and argue, no, it's not indecent, because you have a different definition of what indecent is versus your mother. Or you might be experiencing this yourself with your own children now. The roles have reversed. You're now the mother. And you have a young daughter who's rebelling, who's trying to push the line with you in this of indecency. What piece of clothing is right and wrong? it's a moving line. Again, your definition was completely different from your mother's, and now your definition is completely different than that of your daughter. So that's a good example here of religion, that how the definition moves is along the spectrum here. And so it relates to the idea of pornography. And so I use this famous example of a U.S. Supreme Court case here of Jacobelius versus the state of Ohio in 1964. That is what was being argued here. Jacobelius was a film, he owned a film store where he would showcase films. And he had several foreign films that featured pornography. And Jacobelius had this film store, this film theater, small film theater, located in Cleveland. However, the townspeople were quite upset that he was showing nudie films and indecent films and pornography there, and they wanted it outlawed. And so they eventually got the state to outlaw his building, his business. But Jacobelius argued that no, this is art. This isn't pornography. This is foreign films. This is art. You don't understand what's going on here. So you have just violated freedom of expression from the First Amendment here. And so he took the state of Ohio to court to sue, went up to the federal court. And at the heart of the case was the definition of indecency. What is the definition of indecency? And so Justice Potter Stewart famously argued in his summation that he didn't agree with Jacobelius here. He actually agreed with the state of Ohio here. But in his argument, his written argument, he talks about that it's impossible for the court here to come up with a definition of indecency, because the moment that I put a definition on paper, it will change because of how fast culture is moving. That at one time indecency was considered of a woman showing her ankles in society and culture. Having her hair down was a sign of indecency once in our culture. But now, this is in the 1960s, it's not. It's not a sign of indecency because culture has changed. So it seems ridiculous, Justice Potter argued, for me to come up with the definition of pornography. But then he gave a big however. However, and he gave his famous quote here, I know it when I see it. I know what pornography is. I might not can define it. I know what indecency is. I might not have a written, simple definition of what it is. But I know it when I see it. And he's right. He's right. The same thing applies to religion. We might not can come up with a simple, all-encompassing definition of religion, but yet we know it when we see it. That example I gave you, that I brought you, that I magically transported you with powers that I have, that transported you into and placed you inside a Catholic Mass ceremony, you would immediately say, oh, this is religion, because I know it when I see it. Even if you're not Catholic, don't know what the rituals are, don't know what the words are, don't know what the symbols are, the Eucharist is, what the priest is doing, what am I doing with this cup, what am I doing with this bread, why am I on my knees, why do I have a pair, they have prayer beads on their hands, and they're praying the rosary. But yet you know what you see what they're doing. Oh, that's religion. I can recognize it. And the reason that we can recognize it is because religion is largely defined by culture. It's really the culture and society that give definition to things that we see. And thus, same thing with religion. It's our culture that defines what religion is. So a primary example that I want to give you this. This is a true story right here, this image here. This is a statue of Lenin, Nikolai Lenin, who was the founder of the communist state of Russia, of the Soviet Union. This is a statue of Nicholas Lenin in Ukraine, that after the fall of the Soviet Union, when Ukraine became independent, the people in Ukraine, as a sign of revolt, a sign of disrespect for Nikolai and the Communist Party and what the communists had done in their country, they redesigned the statue, radically redesigned it to look like Darth Vader. As you can see there, it looks like Darth Vader. They put the helmet on, they put the shoulder pads, the chest plate. It looks like Vader. But yet, if you strip away some of the imagery, some of the pieces, it's actually a statue of Lenin that had been redecorated. So we know this. Culturally, we know this reference. We know that this is not to be something taken seriously. This is a joke. This is a satire. But yet, imagine this, that a thousand years from now, archaeologists digging in this area, in this town in Ukraine, and they discover this statue of Darth Vader. And they also discover in else places comic books, figurines of Star Wars characters, books, the movies. And they see the phrase constantly, the religion of the Jedi, the religion of the Sith. Archaeologists 1,000 years from now might think that, wait a minute. This is a religious statue. Star Wars was a religion. That people in this area worshipped Darth Vader, that the people in this area were worshipers of Sith versus those who were worshipers of the Jedi. But we know, I mean, if you think about it, that's a very reasonable assessment if you don't know the whole story. But we know the truth today. We know that this is a joke, that this is a satire. But the point is culture. We know it because of culture. Our culture tells us that this is a joke because Star Wars is part of our culture, part of a movie that we experience. But 1,000 years from now, it's going to be a completely different culture. It's going to be quite removed from our culture and our experiences and might not understand what this is. And so it's going to radically reinterpret it as something else. But yet, all of us, universally, like Justice Potter here in the Jacob Elias in Ohio case, I know it when I see it. That's not religion. We look at the statue of Lenin there. That's not religion. But again, 1,000 years from now, somebody else, the definition has changed and moved because they're not a part of that culture. They're not a part of the inside joke here. And so religion is largely defined by culture. I'm going to hit this point even harder on the next slide. I want you to think about this question. Which is the real flag? So now I'm going to show you two images of flags that they're going to be completely different, but they're going to have some similar characteristics. So I'm going to ask you, which one do you know is the real flag by looking at these two images simultaneously? And I know from an instant, you're going to be able to recognize this. Instantly, you're going to be able to pick it up within a millisecond of which one's the real flag and which one's the fake flag because of culture. So real quick, which one's the real flag? Instantly, you know exactly it's the one on the left. That's the flag of the United States of America. The one on the right is not. It's an abomination. That's not the flag of the United States. I'm not going to pledge allegiance to that flag. I'm not going to wear that on my shoulder and be proud of it or wave that during 4th of July, Memorial Day celebrations. The one on the right, it's not the American flag. The one on the left is the one that my father fought for during Vietnam. It's the one that our soldiers fight for and bleed for. It's the one that we proudly say our Pledge of Allegiance to. That's the one that we honor and instantly respect. We know it. We know it because of culture. Culture has told us which one is the right flag. Now, I'm going to try to give you a little subversion here, because I'm going to look at we're going to look at what the law says, the original law that was written by our forefathers that helped design the American flag. And so this is the Flag Act of 1777. So mind you, the language is going to reflect the time of the period that's going to talk about the 13 stars as being the 13 colonies, but however, of course, we've progressed since then. But this is the original act passed by our forefathers of what the flag is supposed to look like and be designed as. So the Flag Act of 1777 says, resolved that the flag of the 13 United States be 13 stripes alternating red and white, and that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field representing a new constellation. End quote. That's what the act says. This is what our flag is supposed to be. So look at that definition and look at the two images. Now, again, take away the 13 stars, because again, we have evolved with our country. Now, which one's the real flag? Based off the letter of the law. It could be both. Again, remove the 13 stars from the equation. Just look at the text. 13 stripes alternating red and white. Both have 13 stripes, both alternating red and white, whichever direction that you start from. Up or down, left or right, doesn't matter. They have the 13 stripes and alternating red, white, red, white, red, white. Has to have a union. The stars have to represent the states of the union. So we have 50 stars here. They have to be white in a blue field. We have that in both images. And they have to be representing a new constellation of stars. It doesn't say what type of constellation that needs to be in a square shape. It doesn't say that. So again, from the text itself, the letter of the text, each one is correct. But we know that's wrong. We know which one's the right flag. It's because of culture. Culture defines what this is. It's the one on the left. It's what we culturally know and see and all agree and represent. And so that's the point that I want to bring up. Religion is largely defined by culture. And so what do I mean by culture? Culture is an umbrella term which encompasses the social behaviors, knowledge, belief systems, the belief institutions, and norms of human society. And that humans, because of our culture, this is how we know how to behave. This is the knowledge that we gather as a people, as an individual. It comes from our culture. The institutions, like the flag there, we know which one's the flag because of our culture. We know how to behave in culture, in society, because of our culture. Humans, we all acquire culture through learning and acculturation, being a part of our society, being in depth, and then being a part of society. It teaches us different cultures so that when we go to live in another country, we learn the rules of being in another country by socializing, going to events, learning to speak the language, and learning from other people about their culture, and then we take on those habits. And so really what culture is culture is a depository of knowledge and norms. And how does culture do that? It does it through symbols and rituals and language. Case in point here, look at the exclamation point. I purposely made this exclamation point in a certain way. The exclamation point is a symbol. But look at that symbol there. Is it something to be excited about? Or is it something to be cautious about? Why? What in that symbol makes me cautious? Well, it's the red coloring. It's the circle. We're drawing a lot of attentions, and red means cautionary. What in that did I say red means cautionary? That you should interpret this as cautionary? No, it's cultural clues. Cultural things. Red always in our society means stop, slow down. The stop sign outside, what color is it? It's red. The red light. What is when you see a red light while you're driving? What do? Do you go faster? Some of you might to make the light. No, you stop. You slow down. You behave cautiously. So again, just that one little symbol there. And just because I added red tint to it, it changes the definition completely of what I meant. I meant for you to be excited about learning about religion. So I'm drawing a circle, making attention, saying, hey, be really excited about that. But because of all of this, the cultural clues, you misinterpret my intention. But that's really because of culture. Culture has informed you, and inherently, that you looked at that sign, looked at that exclamation point, and immediately thought caution instead of excitement because of the red language, because of the circle, drawing attention to it. So what religion is symbols. It's part of that, symbols. And symbols are complex means of communication. Religion is a form of communication. It's a vehicle of communication, but a vehicle of concepts of human knowledge and meaning. And that we as humans, we need to make meaning out of our existence and out of our universe. And so that's why we create symbols. This is why we do rituals. This is why we create languages and create knowledge systems and norms and practices, because we need to make meaning out of our existence and our being here. And so what religion really is part of that meaning-making system that we do as humans through culture. Culture helps us create meaning, value, understanding, knowledge, social behaviors, norms, and institutions. All of this stuff, religion is part of that. It's inherently a part of that. It's a meaning-making system, but it's a part of that meaning-making system. So it leads us to the greatest question of all within the study of religion is, does religion make culture? Or does culture make religion? And depending on how you answer, that's how you view religion. Is religion being a source of good or a source of evil in this world? Where you value religion. So many people who are very religious oriented, who have high values of their religious traditions, would say religion is what makes culture. So you can see the culture wars that are going on right now in the United States. That why something like abortion is such a huge and divisive topic, because there's people on the right side or the left side of the debate, depending on how you define those dichotomies. There's people on one side of the debate who sees and recognizes and believes that it's religion that makes culture. And so my religion teaches me that abortion is wrong. It's immorally that it's a moral evil that we shouldn't, as a society, as a culture, allow it. Hence, my religion makes my culture. And I'm trying to force my religion upon the rest of culture. And other people say, no, culture is what makes religion. So as a culture, as a society, I value the right for women to choose, women to have their own bodies and to make their own decisions, because a man's not having to make that decision. A man's not having to go through the process of having their body radically changed because of the birth, because of the formation of a child within their body. And that a woman doesn't get to choose then at that point, do I want to be pregnant? And so that's where you can see on that side of the debate that they're making the arguments that it's culture that makes my religion. And so thus, even if there's lots of people who are Christian, who are Jews, who are Muslim, who believe the right for a woman to choose, it's because they believe that culture kind of informs their religion. So you can see how this works, and this is debate and why it's so important. And that's the truth, the hidden, dirty truth about religion, that religion is largely defined by culture. But then which is it? Is it religion and culture, or culture, or religion? I'm going to let you decide on that. So instead of having a simple definition of religion, instead what we need is a cluster definition of religion. A cluster definition of religion. A single definition, a single statement definition is not what's going to do here. Instead, what we need is a cluster definition. And what do I mean by cluster definition? Well, another way to say this term is family resemblance. A family resemblance. And that terminology comes from the famous German philosopher of the 19th century, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who was trying to define, come up with better definitions to certain things and understand how we classify things as humans. And so he talks about how definitions that we define things by the way they're connected to things. And that series of overlapping similarities that are not common to one thing, but common to that have a common feature to them all. So the best example of why Ludwig Wittgenstein comes up with this definition of having a cluster definition or family resemblance, what he argues, was he was trying to define games. How do you create a classification, of categorization, of a definition of games? Games are not all the same. Card games are completely different from playing a hockey game. A video game is completely different than playing hide-and-go-seek as children. Tic-tac-toe is completely different than doing chess. But yet they're all classified as one thing. Games. But they each have different characteristics. Tic-tac-toe can be done on a piece of paper with pens and a simple rudimentary dimension. But yet something like tic-tac-toe, something like red light, green light that we play as children is a little more complex. It involves activity. It doesn't require pieces of paper and pen. It requires being on the field, having a predetermined line, having sets of rules and arbitrary rules. But yet they're the same. They're all games, but they're defined. Their characteristics, their makeup are all different. And so we're going to use Wittgenstein's definition of cluster definition to apply to religion. And that's really what it is. And so for this course, the one that's used the most is Catherine Albanese's 4 C's of religion. That religion has this cluster definition within it, and that it has this basic rudimentary principle that we can apply to. Again, they're connected by overlapping similarities. They're not the same. They don't have to have these exact same things, but they have to have these things in common within each other. So Catherine Albanese talks about her 4 C's. So the first C is, which I personally, while thinking about it, I don't like this definition because I believe it betrays a Western biases and Western religion as a Western concept. Because again, Hinduism, Buddhism really don't have creeds. So I don't like this language. But because of we Americans and we Protestants typically like to have alliteration to help us remember things, which is a great tool. Alliteration is a great tool for remembering things. So we're going to stick with Catherine's 4 C's because it is kind of true. But don't think of it in the Western concept. So when she talks about creed, she's not talking about having an expectation of certain belief systems that I believe in God, I believe in Jesus Christ, I believe in the Bible, I believe in the Virgin Mary, I believe in this, I believe in that. No, that creeds is rather as explanations. That creeds should be seen in the light of explanations of life in the universe. Why do we exist? Religion has an answer for that. What is my purpose in life? Religion has an answer for that. Why do bad things happen to good people? Religion has an answer for that. So think of creed that way, as explanation. Code as behaviors. We might think of code as laws, statutes, things that you think of the Old Testament, of Sharia law. Don't do this, don't do that, but do this, but don't do that. This is what's sacred. This is what's profane here. No, think of behaviors of ethics, the right things, the right actions, the right behaviors. Cultists, cultists, third, cultists, think of practices, ritualizations, traditions, festivals, holidays, things like that. And then fourth is community structures. So social or community relationships, whether that's a hierarchy, something like the Catholic Church that has a hierarchy of bishops, of priests, of archbishops, of popes, papacies, Vaticans, things like that, or simple things as just the local imam at your local mosque. Social networking, like communal relationships within Hinduism, the relationship between a husband and a wife, a father and a daughter, or father and a son, employer, employee, like we would see in Confucianism. So these basic elements that religion has all of these, and that we put them together. And so Buddhism does fit religion because it has some of these elements. Confucianism fits and is defined as religion because it has some of these elements, just like Christianity, just like Judaism. So this is the definition that we would be using in our classes today, the 4 C's of religion. But think of religion as having these things, an explanation to why the way the world is and how we live in it. The right behaviors and attitudes that we should see, the golden rule, so to speak. The right, certain practices and traditions and ritualizations that we do are vitally important to religion, and these communal and social structures. So, while we have Catherine's explanation, I think it's important to lay my cards on the table. And so this is my definition, the definition of religion that I will be using in this course, and that you can use as well. That I think we should have some skin in the game. We should be able to come down with a definition instead of having a broad categorization, because again, with Catherine's 4 C's, I can say, look at British soccer. And British soccer would fit some of these characterizations. Might not have an explanation of life in the universe, but it has codes and behaviors, cultic practices, traditions, and rituals, and social and communal relationships. And where do you say that? Well, like again, many of you, if you ever watch British soccer or British football as it's called, you might see, if you watch, football games at Chelsea or football games at Manchester United, you'll see signs routinely throughout the stadium there at Old Trafford or there at Stamford Bridge. You'll see signs that will say, Chelsea is my religion. Manchester United is my religion. Is that true? No. We would all agree. We'd all agree with Justice Potter and say, no, that's not true. But however, it does betray some of the basic elements and requirements and cluster definition that kind of fits within Catherine Albasinian's definition here, except creed. There's codes of behavior, there's cultic practices, there's social structures and institutions. So that's why I think it's not always the best definition. It's a good one, but not the best. And so therefore I want to supplant and use my own definition here. That I believe that religion is a range of social and cultural systems of philosophy, symbols, and meaning that designate behavior, practices, beliefs, worldviews, literature, sanctified places, and/or community that generally relates humanity to transcendental or corporal elements. So the big thing here that you can see that I've hit home over and over and over again, religion is a cultural system. It's a system of meaning making. And that's what we're going to be talking about through the rest of this course. When we look at every single religion, we're looking at the way these cultures have created meaning and systems of meaning making, how to see the world, how to view the world, your place in the world, and how to function within it. Before we conclude this lecture, I wanted to provide a slide here with some of the basic vocabulary terms that we'll be using in this course that I might be assuming you know, but you might not know. for a definition. So these are some key terms that we're going to be using over and over again in our course, and that I want you to have a basic definition for. So religion generally is classified under two large umbrella categories: theistic religions and non-theistic religions. And you'll see that very evident in our course that will go forward. Theistic religions, it comes from the Greek word theos, meaning God. So these are religions that have God. So they refer to religious traditions and beliefs in a god or goddess. And non-theistic religions is pretty self-explanatory. Those that do not believe in the existence of a god, but yet have certain emphasis on spirituality, on ethical behaviors, on interconnectivity, and things like that. So theistic religions that we will be talking about will be examples like Buddhism. Well, sorry, not Buddhism. Theistic religions would be Hinduism, would be Judaism, Sikhism, Christianity, Baha'i faith, Islam, Zoroastrianism. Examples of non-theistic religions would be Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. Shinto is more theistic religion, but can be non-theistic. So you can see these are the two basic categories that we will use in this course: theistic and non-theistic religions. And even within the field of religious study, theistic religions can be further subclassified and categorized into varied categorizations. And so these will be the ones that we'll be using a lot of the time in our courses that we'll talk about. Monotheism. Monotheism refers to belief systems and the existence of a singular supreme creator deity. So this is Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Baha'i faith, Sikhism to an extent. Sikhism is a little bit different, but Sikhism, yes. To a little extent, Zoroastrianism, but maybe not. Polytheism is another term that we'll be using. Poly comes from the Greek word many, polytheism, many gods. So it refers to the belief system and the existence of multiple gods and goddesses. So you think of Hinduism. As we'll see, that's a little problematic, but still think of Hinduism. Think of the ancient Greeks. Think of the ancient Romans. Think of the Native Americans that had pantheons of deities, the Norse gods of Thor and Loki and Odin. Think of those. Henotheism. Now, henotheism is probably a word you've never heard of in the study of religion. Henotheism refers to a belief system in which one deity is worshipped or considered supreme over the existence of other deities. So henotheism is really, an example of this would be Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is more of a henotheistic religion. The other one would be pantheism, panentheism. So pan comes from the Greek word meaning all, pan. En is the Greek preposition in, the dative, in, and theo, God, all in God. God is in all. So pantheism refers to a belief system that the divine is in every part of the universe, but yet also exists beyond the universe. So it's not pantheism, which is without the en, pantheism, which is all is God. No, because that means that the universe is God. Here, panentheism is a little bit different. It's a little more nuanced, and we'll talk about that more when we get to Hinduism, because really Hinduism is our example of pantheism. Other religious terms that we'll be using and other classifications of religions that we'll be using a lot is denominations. Denominations is used as it refers to subgroups or subdivisions within religious traditions that operate under a common belief system but yet have developed their own alternatives. So Christianity is full of different denominations: Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Protestants. And Protestants have even subdivisions within their own denominations: Baptists, Methodists, Anglicans, Presbyterians, Mormons. They're all denominations of within Christianity. Sects, so not S-E-X, sex, but sex, S-E-C-T-S, sex. Sects traditionally defined as religious subgroups that have broken off from a main religious body, and that the separation is irreparable. So again, you could argue that Protestantism and Catholicism are sects of each other. Well, that Protestantism is a sect of Catholicism, that it broke off and that the relationship is irreparable. Sunni and Shia, you can argue, are sects of Islam because they've broken away from each other. Another term that you might hear me use is cults. And so they have actually two meanings within the field of religion. I think we're all aware of number one, and this is the one that we use primarily in our own circumstances, that it's a pejorative term that we refer to a small group of people who are outside of our society and are outside of our religious traditions, that they have broken away and they're quite weird, that we would say, that we consider them deviant practices outside the norm. However, the term cult can also be used to refer to a set of religious institutions or practices that are within a specific culture. So, example, you might hear me talk about the cult of the Romans or the cult of the ancient Israelites. I'm referring to the institutions, not to this subgroup, this small group of deviant practices, but it can refer to the institutions as well. You'll hear terms like orthodoxy as well. Orthodoxy as accepted religious norms. And the counter of orthodoxy is heresy. Heresy comes from the Greek word, the Greek word meaning opinion. And it means kind of a different belief system. A belief or theory that's strongly at odds with the established norm, or what's considered the established norm. And so these are going to be some of the terms that we're going to be using in this course.